For faculty, supporting Capstone multilingual writers. Part 4, rhetorical aspects and approaches. Researchers Peltridge and Starfield broke down 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers and what can make writing a capstone study potentially difficult for capstone multilingual students. Peltridge and Starfield's 2007 analysis of 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers include psychoaffective/emotional aspects, behavioral aspects, social aspects, and rhetorical aspects. In this video, part 4 of 4, I'm going to focus on the 4th aspect, rhetorical aspects and approaches. This is often the big one, the one that we get the most questions about, and the one that is often most visible, setting capstone multilingual writers apart from their native-speaking peers. I want to start with some research findings about the common concern of rhetorical aspects and the capstone multilingual writer. Researchers Rogers et al. Conducted a study on challenges and pedagogical complications in dissertation writing and found that while native English speakers and multilingual students tended to experience similar challenges and difficulties, multilingual writers needed more support and more intensive editing work at the sentence level. Their student survey matched this result as well, where multilingual writers rated challenges to sentence clarity and editing and proofreading higher than native English speakers. Let's take a look at some of the possible reasons behind these challenges. First, this could be the first experience the student has had with managing and structuring such a large amount of text. Rogers et al. Reported that writers often had a lack of experience with the writing that is required in different sections of the dissertation, especially the literature review. There may also be cultural differences in the text that could cause rhetorical problems. Some cultures, for example, are more writer-responsible cultures rather than reader-responsible cultures. To explain this a bit, in a writer-responsible culture, the writer is responsible for explicitly explaining the meaning of the text to the reader. In other words, the reader should not have to work hard to understand what they read. And the United States is an example of a writer-responsible culture. In a reader-responsible culture, by contrast, the writer assumes that some of the responsibility to understanding the text lies with the reader. So, the writer may assume that the reader has read the same text and the relationships between ideas may not be explicitly stated. If a student comes from a more reader-responsible culture, you may notice that they have difficulty linking one idea to the next. In other words, there may be a lack of transitions or a lack of cohesion between ideas. They may also have difficulty understanding the audience for the text. So there may be information left out or not explained because the writer assumed that the reader already knew this information. There could also be differences in organizational structures, such as linear versus more circular organizational patterns. In American academic writing, we tend to use a more linear organizational pattern. For example, we tend to state the thesis statement in the introduction, we tend to include topic sentences at the beginning of paragraphs, and so on. This is not, however, the only way to organize writing, and students who are used to writing in a different organizational pattern may not use this same structure and may struggle to shift their writing to meet American academic organizational expectations. For more on this topic, I recommend the Faculty Smart Guide on Revising Rhetorical Structure. You can find this on the Office of Research and Doctoral Services website under the Form and Style resources, and then under Capstone Multilingual Student Writing Support resources. Developing a writer identity is another common issue. Writing in another language requires the writer to create a new identity and to sound how they think they should sound. And establishing this new identity takes a lot of time and practice. On this next slide, I want to delve into some particular rhetorical aspects that researchers and authors Swales and Feek recognize with graduate multilingual writers. The first one, which is related to developing a writer identity, is developing scholarly voice. And a particular part of developing scholarly voice is the vocabulary shift that happens in written academic texts. This vocabulary shift may not be something that doctoral multilingual writers are aware of. A few examples of this shift are the use of verb choices. Consider the phrasal verb gone down versus the one-word verb from the Latin origin decreased. Anytime the writer can replace the phrasal verb or a prepositional verb with a one-word verb, the more scholarly the writing will sound. Scholarly voice also appears in conciseness and specificity. Consider the phrase a lot of, which is 3 words, versus the single word considerable, or gotten more intense versus intensified. The more concise and more specific the word choice, the more scholarly the voice. And a third example here of scholarly voice is the use of mid-position adverbs. Adverbs are an interesting part of speech in English in that they can often slide into various slots in a sentence. We sometimes see them at the beginning of a sentence, at the end of a sentence, or before the verb in the middle of a sentence. Consider the sentence, "It is necessary to follow the law carefully," versus, "It is necessary to carefully follow the law." Moving that adverb carefully to mid-position elevates the scholarly voice here. Another aspect that Swales and Feek mentioned is that multilingual graduate students may struggle to use hedging and boosting appropriately. Hedging and boosting are used to qualify claims. Some examples would be words like always, sometimes, might, possible, perhaps. As an editor, I often notice students relying a bit too much on hyperbole. A student may write, "All researchers believe this," or "Every student struggles with this," rather than using hedging language that might be more accurate. In an attempt to create a writing identity or scholarly voice, the writer might overgeneralize and create bias instead. Finally, developing paraphrasing skills is the last aspect I wanted to mention on this slide, because this is something that Swales and Feek spent a lot of time on their research on too. And I wanted to start by acknowledging that paraphrasing is difficult for all writers, native speakers included. There are a lot of steps involved in creating an effective paraphrase, and when reading a bunch of well-done published paraphrases, I think it's sometimes easy to forget how the writer ended up with that end result. But if we take a step back and think about what we need in order to paraphrase, the writer first has to clearly understand the text itself, and then understand all the grammatical structures of the original idea, and then know how to accurately represent the same meaning in a new way in a grammatically correct form, and then know how to cite it. There are a lot of places where this could go wrong. On this next slide, I wanted to highlight the most common sentence-level grammatical errors that tend to appear in multilingual writing, at least according to researcher and author Dana Ferris. These sentence-level grammatical issues can impede understanding for the reader. However, being aware of what to look for and sometimes giving a name to a type of error can be helpful for the Capstone multilingual writer. Knowing these possible categories of grammatical error often help me as well to be able to better focus on my feedback on the writing that I'm reading. Watch for errors in sentence structures, including simple, compound, and complex sentences. As a subset of this, look for run-on sentences and sentence fragments, issues with parallel sentence structure, and issues with relative, restrictive, and non-restrictive clauses. This list of common errors also includes punctuation, specifically commas and semicolons, word choice, verb tense and verb forms, word forms, subject-verb agreement and noun endings, pronouns, articles, prepositions, and spelling. For more information and explanation of these concepts, the Form and Style website has pages on each of these topics. Now that we've looked at some of the common rhetorical aspects, I'd like to shift to approaches or possible solutions to help students with these. First, I think it's important to encourage students to do extensive reading in their field of study. There's been quite a bit of research showing that the more you read, the better writer you become. Rogers et al. Also reported on this. Students surveyed found that reading published dissertations was the third most helpful strategy to write a dissertation on their own. The other strategies that I mentioned in earlier videos are one-on-one conversations with the committee, written feedback, and peer support. Also, I suggest encouraging students to read not only for content, but also for organization, development, and specific linguistic features. And to further this previous thought, rather than having students just passively reading, encourage them to take a more active role in the process. For example, you could have students choose an article that is considered a good example of published writing in your field of study, and then have them complete an article analysis on this sample. Have students analyze things like the verb tenses used, expressions and field-specific vocabulary, how headings are used, the use of transitions and linking devices, and so on. They can then better emulate the writing that they have analyzed. In addition, encourage students to take notes on useful terms that they can use in their own writing. These would be things like common verbs used in their field, expressions to introduce topics, build arguments, and show agreement or disagreements, how to close a discussion, and so on. The last bullet point on this slide is that I recommend students frequently practice effective paraphrasing. And remember that this skill takes a lot of time to develop. In other words, students cannot just practice it once in one class, but instead require multiple times within a course and practice across different courses to really master this skill. We also have some resources on the Form and Style website that focus on common areas of difficulty. Specifically, you can refer students to the 4 Capstone Multilingual Writers resources. I've included the URL for these resources on the slide. There are videos, smart guides, which are PDF how-to guides, and writing tips on topics such as rhetorical structure and cohesion in the Capstone document, making the shift to more scholarly voice, and revising for sentence-level grammar. Another approach is to encourage students to use an online thesaurus and a corpus. And I have to say that using a corpus is one of my very favorite ways to develop scholarly voice and to check for sentence level grammatical errors. A corpus is a large collection of texts, and it can be something as general as the internet or something more specific, such as Google Scholar or the Corpus of Contemporary American English. You can use a corpus to search for grammatical structures, such as sentence construction, verb tenses, subject-verb agreement, count versus non-count nouns, article usage, preposition usage, and so on. For more on this, see the video on using a corpus and the Smart Guide on using a corpus. Both can be found in the Form and Style website under the 4 Capstone Multilingual Writers resources. Another approach to help students overcome rhetorical challenges in their writing is to have them use a grammar revision journal. In order to revise for sentence-level grammatical errors, self-awareness is really the key. Also, often grammatical errors follow patterns. For instance, when I read and respond to a piece of student work, I am often able to categorize the errors into a handful of categories. Keeping a grammar revision journal is one way doctoral multilingual writers can help gain awareness of the patterns of their own grammatical errors and how to revise them. The journal itself gives a place for the writer to keep track of 4 things: the type of error, examples of the error, revisions and corrections for the error, and the grammar rule to follow. On the Form and Style website, under 4 Capstone Multilingual Writers resources, you can find a short video on using a grammar revision journal, and there's also a smart guide on this revision strategy. Again, the overall goal is for writers to become more self-aware of writing strengths and weaknesses because this self-awareness leads to effective self-editing. For more support, I suggest visiting and bookmarking the Faculty Support for Working with Capstone Multilingual Writers page, located on the Office of Research and Doctoral Services website under Form and Style resources. I've included the URL on this slide. This page contains information on Capstone Multilingual Student Writing Support resources that you can share with your students. There's also a series of smart guides, those quick PDF how-to guides, for faculty supporting Capstone Multilingual writers. In addition, there are other videos like this one on different aspects of supporting Capstone Multilingual writers. This final slide contains the full references for research I referenced in this video. This was part 4 of 4, breaking down Peltridge and Starfield's analysis of 4 aspects affecting doctoral multilingual writers. I hope you find this information helpful as you continue to support Capstone Multilingual writers here at Walden.